Hello, animation fans, and welcome to another iAnimate podcast. I'm your host, Larry Vasquez, and you're listening to episode 83. In this episode, we have guest Kirby Atkins joining us. Kirby is a writer, a director, and animator. He's been in the industry for quite some time, started out even on the TV series Jimmy Neutron, Boy Genius, and has worked on such films as Scoob, the BFG, and Alvin and the Chipmunks. He's worked at such studios as Leica, Weta, Real Effects, and Sony, and is currently over at Brazen Animation right now. One of the things that made this podcast unique was the ability to talk to Kirby about his own film, Mosley, which he was able to get produced. It was a really cool movie. I've had a chance to check it out. And it's currently making its way around in certain parts of the world and will soon be, I think, in the US as per our conversation. Neat to talk with somebody who's been in the industry since, early CG with Jimmy Neutron to working at other high-level studios and have his own movie produced. So it was just a great conversation, awesome guy, and just a neat opportunity to talk to somebody who loves this industry, who's been in the trenches as well as directed, and I'm sure you'll enjoy this podcast. Check it out. Well, Kirby, first off, I always like to thank my guests. It's a neat opportunity to talk with you guys. I know people are from around the world who listen to our podcast, and you mentioned you're in beautiful, beautiful Carmel, California, which is a very cool treat for you. So just a neat opportunity to get you guys, and so we appreciate your time on this podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Very cool. Looked at your LinkedIn bio. You've got quite an extensive resume here, and particularly having written and directed a feature animation film. So you've written, directed, animated. You've been in this industry long enough to be able to take on many hats there. And so, how did you get into the industry? What drew you to animation?
Well, my dad was curator of art museums up and down Texas and California.
Okay.
I kind of was a museum kid and was in figure drawing, nudes and things like that when I was 13 years old.
Okay.
I kind of had that. Had that creative bent all about me, just waiting for Dad to get off work at the museum. I would take theater classes and I would do all this stuff. But then I sort of got sidetracked in college and ended up teaching high school after that. And it took me just a couple of years of that to go, I hate this. I want to do creative stuff. And Toy Story had just come out.
Okay.
And I was playing around with video toasters. You remember those?
Oh,
things?
yeah. From NewTek.
Yeah, Amigas,
yeah.
things like that. And I knew that there was something here. I could draw. I never did animation, but I could draw like the wind. And I love stories, and I was always writing and all these things. So it was an odd time, is back in the late 90s when things were kind of opening up and people really didn't know what this medium could do.
Right.
So I was in Sunnyvale. I moved to Sunnyvale to this is before any online animation courses like
iAnimate. Yep.
Yeah. And so there was this weird tech school kind of thing to where you just sort of went to these odd schools and nobody really knew how to teach this stuff. It was odd, but it was in the Bay Area of California.
Uh-huh.
And so that we had a lot of Pixar folks come in and trying to recruit and all that kind of thing. This is back in 97.
Okay.
And I actually got my first job at Will Vinton Studios, which is now Leica.
Oh, very cool.
Yeah. So my first job was at a stop motion studio. But I was doing M&M commercials and doing just everything that you could
Nice.
do. It was a great studio. And Travis was there at that time and moving on up. And
wow.
As he did.
Yeah.
And so, but I spent 3 years. My daughter was born out there in Portland, and that was my first job.
Amazing.
Yeah. So, and then after that, we were doing the PJs, which was a stop motion thing with Eddie Murphy.
I remember that. Yep.
Yep. And we had two shows. We had a thing called Gary and Mike and a thing called and the PJs.
Uh-huh.
Both shows were canceled at the same time, massive layoffs. So I ended up at DNA for this Jimmy Neutron film that
Oh, very cool. Okay, so you worked on that then, huh?
I did, yeah. So I got a lot of connections out in the Dallas area.
Dallas. I was gonna say I remember that being in Texas there. Yeah.
And so I animated on the feature. I ended up directing the TV show for a while, and
Wow.
I had fun directing in the last season, and then I also was writing on the side, and I sold a script to Robert De Niro, which was cool. well, first off, I did a short animated film that won at the Hollywood Film Festival, Best Animated Short, the Hollywood Film Festival, and that got me talking to agents, and then I started writing, and I sold a couple of scripts back when spec scripts were selling, back before franchises were how people were. You could have an idea, write a script, and sell it, and that doesn't exist anymore. But
Gotcha.
It got me going, and so I had almost two separate careers going on at the same time. I was animating or directing on the TV show, and writing, and so yeah, that's sort of where I got started, and having both of these things going on at the same
time, huh?
Yeah.
Now, you mentioned jumping into Leica pretty quick. Is that where you kind of got your animation skills? Did you learn some of that there, or how much did you learn prior to that to get hooked up with a gig like that?
It's amazing how much you didn't have to know back in the early.
That's what I was wondering. Yeah.
So if you do in general how things, I mean, the skill level for students coming on today is just so much more than what we had in the 90s. And I got friends at Pixar who were there from the beginning at Toy Story.
Mm-hmm.
And they talk about that. There's it's just the art form has progressed in such a way. But so I made a couple of really weird films, and they hired me, and I moved from California to Portland, and I pretty much we were using Lightwave at the time.
Yeah. Yep. That's where I started too.
Yeah. And then and so I kind of learned on the job, but I was a senior animator. So,
Gotcha.
And then when I went to DNA, we did the whole Jimmy Neutron film on Lightwave.
Gotcha.
So, which was kind of nuts to
do a feature.
Lightwave to do a feature.
Yeah.
And then we shifted to Maya for the TV, for the series.
Gotcha. Yeah, I love seeing some of the behind the scenes and stuff like that for Leica's stop motion. It would seem like stop motion would be a place where you would really, really have to hone your skills, because there's no undo button, there's no, so that's why I was asking how much knowledge you had prior to that before jumping in, but I could see where you could really start honing in some of your timing and your spacing there, because without an undo.
It's a great way to learn, and it's also a horrible way to learn. And of course, Leica and Travis progressed the art form just immensely.
Yeah.
Part of the charm of stop mo is the stutter, and that sort of handmade sort of quality.
Yeah.
Leica's really smoothed that out to a point that you just honestly don't see it anymore. And I think the animation doesn't necessarily have maybe that same charm. What I think that, because it doesn't have that, but what I think Leica has done is just the way the cinematography and the lighting, there's just certain things about real lighting real stuff.
Yeah.
That cannot be duplicated. Even now, I just don't think it has that same beautiful soft look.
Yeah. Gotcha.
Leica films are just gorgeous in that.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. So now you're kind of going along these two paths of both animation as well as directing there. You mentioned that you were doing that there at Jimmy Neutron. That was DNA?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay. So from there, where did you go?
From there, I ended up having a bit of a writing career.
Okay.
Which you could back in the day, I guess you can still today, but you could make a career out of writing movies that never get made.
Okay.
And so I had enough work because of what I had, the specs I had sold both to Miramax and to De Niro, was the fact that I was getting work to write. And so I ended up doing a whole lot of writing. But I had a friend who I met at DNA, Press Romanillos. I don't know if you've ever heard of Press Romanillos, but he's a disciple of Glenn Keane, and was one of the leads on Spirit. He was DreamWorks. He animated on Little Mermaid, Beauty and the Beast, all these things. He's a classic guy.
Gotcha.
So we met at DNA. He saw my animatic that I was working on for it was a film called Beast of Burden at the time, but it became Mosley.
Oh, okay.
And so we went to Spain. We went to Salamanca, Spain, to work on a short for him, and also to start up production on what was going to be my film. And then Prescott, he had leukemia, and he had 4 bone marrow transplants before we lost him, and kind of grounded just everything. He was just the best creative friend I ever had, and just hugely talented. You know how when people draw, you can tell their style, but Press was like an impressionist in the sense that he could draw. He would say, "Now I'm going to draw like Kirby Atkins," and I would go, and he would draw, and he would just duplicate everything. I can only draw like Kirby Atkins, but he could draw like Kirby and Press and Glenn. He could draw like everybody, and so he was just an amazing influence on me. And really got the ball rolling in regard to. Alice Davis was his good friend, Mark Davis's widow. We would go to Alice's house and have martinis and look through old Bambi and Pinocchio.
Oh man, very cool.
Original artwork that was in the film, and he was a great friend to me, and we met at DNA, and we were gonna make this film in Spain, and then that got grounded, and so I spent a good several years living in a small town in Tennessee, writing scripts for the studios, flying into LA for meetings, and setting and going to Spain and trying to set up a feature out there.
Gotcha. Now, what would be the studio there in Spain at the time?
Well, it was called, at the time, it's gone now. It was called NAENNE.
Okay.
RENNE, and it's gone now. But,
gotcha.
But we were working on a Press's short there, and I actually don't know what happened to them after
gotcha. I sure there's a lot of talent out in Spain, even still now, obviously. Yeah. So I just was curious. Excuse me. Now, what was some of the, you said he was a major mentor to you. What were some of the things that were kind of those either light bulbs or just something that you took throughout your life now as an artist?
You mean that I took from Press? Or
yes. Yeah.
Well, one of the things that I noticed is that people are into animation for different things.
Okay.
And you think that you sort of get in the industry and you think everybody wants the same thing, and then you find out that they don't. Some people are completely happy to get into the weeds in regard to software, in regard to just refining the art of animation. But some people get into it because they want to tell stories themselves. And I always saw animation as a means to an end. I never. Okay. And when you meet people like that who have the same bent as you do, in the sense that it's just a means to tell a story, but the story is what's in your mind.
Yeah.
And animation is just how you get there.
Gotcha.
Right?
That's the medium then.
Yeah. And so he and I connected in that regard, because we didn't, we loved more obscure, serious sort of films, The Man Who Planted Trees, box film, and just things like that we were gravitated toward, that were neither just the studio fare or the art house fare.
Mm.
It was somewhere in between, to where we felt like there are things that we would love to see animation do that it's just not doing.
Gotcha.
And it's either things are very, people talk about adult animation, that's usually either dirty jokes, fart jokes, or things like that.
Right. Yeah.
You know, sausage party, that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or it's art house stuff. And then the other spectrum is it's all family stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I always felt like I wanted to see dramatic stories in animation that
Mm-hmm.
were still, I guess, family oriented. It's not that they weren't family oriented, but it's just that I always felt like there was a whole sort of story that I'm not seeing, that the industry is just not making these things.
Yeah.
They make other films that aren't animated, that I remember The Neverending Story,
Yeah.
Black Stallion, and these sort of films that had teeth to them, you know.
Yeah.
That they were family films, but I remember when that in The Neverending Story, when that horse is drowning in the swamp.
Yeah.
I was a kid when I saw that, and that just I was just haunted me for days, and I was like, that's the sort of stuff those are the sort of films that mark you as a kid.
Yeah.
And stick with you. And I'm like, why aren't we doing this with animation, particularly now that the CG stuff was coming along? I'm like, it's perfect. The acting can get more nuanced. You can do things that you couldn't do in 2D, that for me had to do with not more believable dinosaurs, but the smaller things, the acting and the subtle things.
Right.
I felt like I wasn't seeing. And so when I met Press, he was like, me too. and so you meet people like that, and you end up creating together.
Gotcha.
So he and I just did a whole lot of drawing together and talking about stories together. And we weren't just so much enamored with what animation was doing, but what we thought it could do. And it's one of those things where you wish somebody would write this book that you would love to read, or you wish someone would make this movie that you would love to see.
Yep.
No one's doing it, so you think, well, I guess I'll just make it myself. I guess I'll make the thing I want to see myself.
Yeah.
And so he was just a tremendous friend in that regard. So.
Very cool. Do you see, that seems to be kind of a theme, particularly at least here in the US, as far as animation is concerned. Do you see that getting better? Do you see that it moving towards that, or are we still kind of, I mean, it seems like we're probably still a ways off on that, as far as,
yeah, it's odd because Pixar seems to be the only studio that is allowed to take risks, right? And I think they do. I think they take risks. I think now they're probably taking very calculated risks, because their brand is based upon a certain sort of story that has an emotional resonance to it, and they work. I mean, you can't argue with them; they work, you know. And yet, I do feel like it's almost like we say Pixar can make that, and nobody else can make that.
Yeah, okay.
And I don't know why. I don't know why. I don't know why animation is so nervous that it feels like every 2 or 1 minute you have to have a laugh.
Right.
You can't let a tense moment just be itself. In a regular movie, you wouldn't say, God, we need a laugh right now. Like every 2 minutes we need a laugh. You'd go, no, that's not true to the moment. We need to let the moment play out. We're betraying the moment but animation's scared that they're going to somehow lose the audience, or they're somehow going to scare the kids.
Right.
And I don't know why. I don't know why that is the tendency, except for the fact that it's what we've been doing forever.
Yeah.
And it's hard to just get out of that rut.
Yeah, break that mold there, huh? Gotcha. Well, that's why it's so cool about, and we'll get into it a little bit later, your film, Mosley. Well, maybe now it's just a good time here. Very neat subject story, and some of the scenes as well. it definitely felt like it was breaking that mold a little bit there, trying to push that.
Yeah,
I'm assuming that was obviously intentional then.
absolutely.
Yeah.
And you can get away with things in independent film, a $20 million film, which is what it was, for a couple of reasons. One is that there's not so much money on the line.
Gotcha.
And number two, usually the people who are financing it don't know any better.
Okay.
And so they don't necessarily know how these things are done. It may be the first time they've put money into a movie.
Gotcha.
And so it's just a reflex, I think, that any producer or anybody who finances movies does, is that they want to make their money back.
Yeah,
obviously.
of course.
And so you got to be sympathetic to that. They're putting that's a whole lot of money to
right
put into a thing. And the safest thing to do is to repeat the last thing you saw that was successful.
You're right.
Just that seems like the safest.
Thing to do.
And what you got to try to do is you got to try to win them over that doing something different is going to be good. It's going to be worth doing.
Right.
And so, like, for example, in Mosley, there's a lot of violence. There's a lot of fights. There's particularly the last fight is brutal. And I do remember wanting that last fight in the film to not feel like a fight in a cartoon or not feel like a fight in an animated film.
Gotcha.
I wanted it to feel like a flippin' fight. I wanted to feel like, oh my God, because this is the trick that you're always trying to do with an audience. You want the audience to forget that these stories usually have very predictable outcomes.
Right.
And they always do. And we want to see, in general, unless you're the Coen brothers or something, you want to see these things always usually turn out well for the hero or whatever. But what the trick or the art in it is to try to make the audience forget that and really start to get worried.
Yeah.
You want them to worry, that we want them to go, oh my God, I don't know if
gonna make it.
Going to turn out, if this is going to go well. And the more you can make them feel that way, the lows have to be low for the highs to be high.
Right.
And if you're worried that the lows are too low because you're going to freak out the kids or whatever, and you diminish that, then the highs are going to be diminished too. So that everything sort of is the same.
Gotcha. Level. Yeah. Trying to balance that out, because the more you bring it in, the more this has to kind of go in here. Yeah. Exactly.
And with the animation, I still had to, as I've often called it, leave the cookies on the bottom shelf in regard to, it's an animated film and people have certain expectations.
Right.
And you have to sort of meet the audience halfway, and you want them to grow, you want to stretch and grow them, and you want them to see and experience things that are unique and maybe they haven't seen before. But because they're walking into an animated film, and it's weird, the prejudices that exist. When you go into an animated film, you expect certain things.
Yeah.
If you're going into a regular movie, anything could happen. You're open to different tone, all kinds of things. With animated features, you're expecting certain things to fall in a certain way. And so I had to accommodate that on some level with some comedy and things like that. And I was lucky enough to have the cast that I did, because I felt like the comedy was more character based and not just gags.
Just gags. Yep. No, the movie had a ton of charm. I felt like it was a really cute movie for that reason, but it also had that level of serious tone in there as well that balanced it out very, very nicely. I thought the level of production was very surprising in regards to, it not being a Disney or DreamWorks or Pixar. The level of animation, I actually know Manuel. Yeah. So he was one of our instructors here. He's been, for quite some time, and to see his name pop up on there, I knew he had animated on it, but I didn't know to what degree. And so, the level of quality animation on there was beautiful. And then you had some really, really key money shots in there. Again, this hasn't been released yet, right? So
it will be in the U.S. this next year.
Okay,
I don't exactly know when, but we're creeping around the world.
Gotcha. So I don't want to say too much, but yeah, just some really beautiful money shots in there. So it seemed like you guys, and I know that's kind of the key when it's an independent movie, going, okay, where do we best spend our money?
Exactly.
What was your process in that as you're directing this?
Well, there's a couple of tricks to, and it starts in the writing, because you're taking the inventory down about what are the assets and where's the money going.
Gotcha.
And so that, as you recall, usually in the third act of a film, they're throwing all the assets at the screen, right? The biggest set pieces. There's usually every character that's been in the movie is in the third act. There's some gigantic fight, whatever, right? Mosley feels more epic than it actually is, I think, in regard to assets, because if you recall, the last fight is between two characters,
yeah,
in a giant surreal orchard that is sort of like this, like California redwood trees.
Yeah,
you can get lost. It's like a labyrinth.
Like an elaborate. Yep.
And so that was the first thing I put into production, because it was basically three assets, and those are the first characters we had modeled and rigged.
Interesting.
Yeah, it was the Warfield the Hunter, Mosley, and then we had a proxy of the set, which was easy because it's these trees that are
duplicated. Yeah.
Right. And we just went straight into it. So if you think about it, we could spend our time and focus on the animation and the performance in ways that, because we had two characters.
Gotcha. Yeah.
And so Manuel and I looked at a lot of reference footage of cowboys wrestling steers down. If it was a fight between a quadruped and a biped character, and there was a lot of weight going on, and a lot of obviously the power is in the bigger quadruped creature, but the bipedal creature had hands and tools. And so it was a battle between brawn, but also ability.
You're right.
And dexterity and things. And so we could really just, and we did. I mean, we spent a lot of time on each shot to make sure that fight, that the hits felt like hits.
Yeah.
And it was great because we weren't concerned with peripheral assets. We could really concentrate on the performance of the characters.
Gotcha.
I did want to make sure that that where I was, and if you look, you'll be able to see where the holes are. The lighting could have been better. Certain things could have been better. What I wanted to emphasize was the performance of the characters. I wanted these characters to act and to emote, and to so that's where I put the lion's share of my attention, because I felt like everything else is forgivable.
Yeah, for sure.
I feel like performance of a character, these are your actors, and a bad casting can ruin a movie. And it's the same with bad animation can ruin a movie, because you want to believe what you're seeing. And I felt like everything else, bad lighting is more forgivable than a bad performance from your actor, which is your animator, which is what the film's about. It's about these characters, right?
Yep.
So I really had to have a bullseye sort of sensibility about keeping my eye on the ball, because it was so easy with effects and things like that to
start gravitating. Yeah. Now, hey, correct me if I'm wrong. Did you help voice in that?
I was Mosley.
That's what I thought. Yes. Yeah. It went quick on that. And I got to tell you, okay, this is no, stroking the ego here. You did a fantastic job. I mean that in all sincerity. One of the things I love about, you get certain characters like Poe or, Woody or whatever, that you go, it just fits, right? And then you get some other characters in movies that you feel like, okay, they just got him for their name, Yeah. One of the things I loved about how well you did your acting job in there is I didn't recognize the voice like it was some high paid actor, but it felt like, man, this is great actor. This worked out really well where it fits the character, and you did a fantastic job. And I was very, very surprised to see you on there too. So
thanks. That wasn't originally planned.
okay.
The character Rue, who's plays the young Thorfinn in there, was my daughter. Yeah. So
very nice.
So here's the story with that. Back when I was telling you I was writing films for a living that were never getting made. That's when I started making the animatic for Mosley, and I started storyboarding it. And just because I wanted to just start, I could wait for financing to come, but I was like, I want to make it. I want to do it now. So I just started storyboarding and putting this thing together. And at one point, my daughter knew the characters because she'd be in my office. She was young. She was 6 years old. And I would be drawing the characters, and she'd be on the floor drawing the characters and cutting them out and telling the story on the floor. And so one day I thought, I need voices for this thing. I'm ready for voices. And so I thought, well, I'll just get Leah, my daughter, I'll just get a microphone and we'll get on the floor and we'll just play things out. It was like improv with a 6-year-old because she knew the story. You know how kids are. Kids know the story. They want to stay on the rails of the story, but they will make up little asides and things. And so everything that's the exact performance that you hear in the film. So
gotcha.
So that is I handed that audio off to my engineers in New Zealand. And of course we had John Rhys Davies and Lucy Lawless and Tamara Morrison and all the big actors that we recorded professionally.
Yeah.
And then they're like, well, who's going to play Rue? And I said, I think I want my daughter to play Rue because she was off script and it was just spontaneous what she did. She made up this little song and it's in the film and she just made it up on the spot. And so I handed over that audio and it was just me and her interacting. And as you know, there was some juice and there was some honesty and real chemistry between us that couldn't be duplicated in a studio.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
And so I kept thinking about, well, how have I ever seen this done before? And I thought of Richard Donner's Superman, where they basically put Marlon Brando in there and they front loaded the cast with all of these names. And so I had to cast a lot of Kiwis just because we were getting film commission money.
Gotcha.
They wanted a lot of New Zealanders in there. And so I just cast John Rhys Davies, Rhys Darby, all these guys, Lucy Lawless. And I thought at the center of this thing, I felt like was Mosley and Rue.
Yeah.
And just us improving, me and my daughter, she wasn't acting. She was just playing.
Yeah.
Which was sort of like Thumper and Bambi.
Yes.
Or any of those sort of things. That kid actors are the worst because they're
trying to,
they're doing too much, you know what I'm saying? And so there's something that's beautiful about a kid being spontaneous that when you capture it, this is what they did in Creature Comforts, right? There's this spontaneity that happens that when you put animation in that, it just
shines
to life. And so that's that's the reason why I'm Mosley, is because the interaction between the two of us felt really natural and I didn't want to mess with that, you know.
Well, when you don't notice that it's not a professional actor in the sense of one that's in Hollywood movies and things like that, you don't notice it. That you've done a great job. So
well, I appreciate it. Thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, now one of the things that you mentioned about this movie was that you had it was called Beast of Burdens earlier. So how long from the time that you're really kind of going like, hey, I want to get this going, versus the time that now where you actually got it going? What was the time frame on that?
Well, this will clue you in. So I had been working on the animatic for a while, and then I recorded my daughter when she was 6. When we moved to New Zealand to make the film, she was 17.
Okay. That sounded like it had been some time. Yeah.
It had been a while. So, I had cut the entire film and storyboarded and cut the entire film together.
Man.
So that was one of the reasons why the financing, why we were able to just start, is because I didn't come to the film commission. It was the first co-production between New Zealand and China.
Okay.
And it was a business opportunity looking for a movie. And so, you could read a lot of scripts, but I already had the whole film cut.
Gotcha.
And storyboards. And I had voices, and you could watch it. People could just sit and watch the film.
Right.
And that's how I was able to secure that financing. And just we had pre-production still to do, but the bigger problems in pre-production were solved because the story didn't change much. It changed a little when we got the new cast and I rewrote the film for those voices, but what occurs in the film hasn't changed really since the moment my daughter and I were playing it on the floor.
Gotcha.
It's the same story that it was, without a lot of interference, which is great. I mean, there's something to be said for that whole collaborative process when you get a studio and the story trust or whatever they call it.
Yeah.
That's fantastic if you can have that. But there's also something you lose. Brad Bird is able to do this, I think, better than anybody. That Brad Bird is able to take the giant mechanism of a studio and still you feel like when you watch the film, you feel like you're getting a message from an individual person.
Gotcha. Yeah, that is not easy to do when you look at the size of a studio.
And Pete Docter's that way too, but I think Brad Bird's the best in the sense that you felt like with Incredibles, he was telling you about his experience becoming a middle-aged person and how hard that was, feeling like you're past your prime. That's the story of The Incredibles.
Yeah.
That's what he's communicating to you. And you feel like it was one guy communicating that to you, using the mechanism of a giant studio to tell the story. And so that, I think, is the challenge, is to not lose the individual voice of the writer or the director in the process, in the hamburger machine that is, creating a film, particularly an animated film.
Did you feel like, let me see how I can phrase this, that there was a lot of pushback for you to have additional voices in what was said to go on the screen? Or did you feel like because of the situation with a business looking for a movie and you had the full backbone of this thing, the skeleton of it, that they were able to kind of just trust you to kind of move with it on?
It was a lot of all of that. So it was every now and then for example, I told you I put that fight into production first, kind of in a sneaky way, because I felt like when they finally got around to giving me some notes, and they weren't coming, but I felt like at some really inconvenient time, they're going to have to put some notes on me.
And now it's too late, huh?
And one of the notes is going to be, it's too violent at the end. I knew that was coming. But if I'd already spent that money and made that sequence, then that money's out the door.
Yeah. Sorry, guys, we can't change it. We got to keep going.
but at the same time, it wasn't, I also felt like I could make an argument that, hey, look, like I said before, the lows need to be low for the highs to be high. I can make that argument theoretically to them.
Yeah.
And they'd be like, yeah, whatever. You still need to make it less violent.
Yeah.
Or I could show them something.
Yeah.
And usually when I showed them and they saw, I don't want to spoil the movie, but it gets dark, and then something happens that elevates everything, and they felt that, and so we were all feeling the same things, and you can't argue with that.
Yeah.
They'd be okay.
They're already invested in it now versus not having seen something yet. And now
they forgot that they were there to check me, and they got emotionally involved in the story. And that was the only way that I knew to win, is I had to let the film make the argument for me.
Gotcha.
And the only way to do that is to get several paces ahead of them. So by the time they had something that they wanted to criticize that made me nervous, because I felt like that would compromise the story, I could say, well, look at it. Let's watch it. And then I'd go, so now you want to change that? but it wasn't. But it also wasn't without its. I had to. I also, you remember there's chicks in the film. And there's this great little moment where I have Rue trying to get the bucket going.
Yep.
And it's just this nice little sequence, little montage-y kind of comedy sequence.
Yeah.
And I knew that was going to be comfort food to the investor. And,
Gotcha.
And so I didn't feel like it compromised the story.
No, not at all.
Yeah.
Yeah, not at all.
I felt like it gave it that levity that it needed, but it did it without betraying the other moments. That's what I feel like that's the balancing act with all this kind of stuff.
Gotcha. Okay. So now kind of a next question here. Having had something in development for roughly a decade, how were you able to be that patient on something? Is it something, hey, look, it's coming, or it's, do you have these thoughts that, man, I'm never going to get this thing made, or that's a significant amount of time. So how do you be patient during that time?
I don't, this is, what's the Richard Williams thing, right? With Thief and the Cobbler.
Mm-hmm.
This is not great career. Don't do what I did. It's bad career advice, right? You're not supposed to put too much of yourself into one project.
Right.
You're supposed to invest your own money in your own project. You're not supposed to, all these rules, the things that you're not supposed to do. I did all of those, but I don't necessarily give that as advice to anybody in regard to that. Because it could all blow up in your face. And I felt that all the time. I felt like, but the thing that kept going back to the story, and every time I had a free moment or I wasn't writing something, or wasn't animating just to make money while I was in between writing gigs and all the things that you have to do to make a living. Anytime I had a moment that I could spare, I was drawing more storyboards and putting the film together.
Gotcha.
On my own. And if I needed a voice, I did the voice myself. And it wasn't, I have to be honest, it wasn't because I was looking for some great day when somebody was going to put $20 million in my lap and say, holy God, make this movie.
Yeah.
It was because I really enjoyed doing it.
Gotcha.
And I do feel like if there's some key to longevity, it's that you better damn well enjoy doing it, because the other thing may not happen.
Yeah. Okay. And then it's not a waste.
Well, yeah. And we have to enjoy our work, right? Yeah. And this is why I've written a lot of movies and see them turned into hamburger before. But Mosley was one of those that I'm not going to give all my best stuff to the machine of Hollywood and watch it get chewed to nothing. I want to have at least one thing in my creative life that I'm not going to sacrifice to the gods of the industry.
Gotcha.
One thing that I want to do that for me, I wasn't scared that it would never, I was scared that it would never get made, because I was scared that it would get made and get screwed up.
Gotcha. Yeah. Yeah.
And so I do feel like I think all of us as artists need to have certain things that we do for the sheer joy of doing them. And if they pay off in some other way, for our career, that's great. And you should go for that. But if they don't, if it crushes you to the point that you never want to make anything again for yourself, I think you were kind of not doing it. You weren't doing it necessarily for yourself. You were doing it for somebody else.
Gotcha.
And I see people who have projects all the time, and then they get a chance to work on Batman or something, and they drop their idea because, holy God, I get to work on Batman. And it's like, well, have some respect for your own idea. I mean, at least put more of yourself into your stuff. I mean, this is your stuff.
Yeah.
Are you going to be making are you going to be a servant for the franchises the rest of your life? And we all do. I mean, to make a living, we all have to do that. But as creative people, I think we have to have at least as much respect for the stuff that comes out of our heads
Right.
as we do just serving whatever happens to the trend happens to be, you know.
Right. Right. No, very cool. What was the genesis for this movie? Where
Well,
did this come from?
it can a lot of different places, but one was in the most generic thing was that, like we talked about before, there were films that I remember watching as a kid that, I mean, the next day it would cling to you like a spider, like walking through a spider web,
Yeah, yeah.
you know, and you can't shake it. And it's a mood that, like the Never-Ending Story, which
You're still
hasn't aged,
thinking
it
about it.
hasn't
Yeah.
aged well at all. You know, it's awful clunky movie to watch, but emotionally, there were things that I remember that just smacked me in the head as
Yeah.
a kid. And so I wanted a film that would have, I wanted to just in a very generic way, I wanted to make something that felt like that. And then the specific idea of the devolution came from something I think that everybody has noticed with animated stuff. Like, you know, you in the Disney world, you have Mickey Mouse and he has a mortgage and a car and he lives in a neighborhood. And his best friend is Goofy, who also has a mortgage and a car and lives next door. But Mickey also has the pet, Pluto, who's also a dog,
Uh-huh.
but is naked on all fours, doesn't have hands. And I remember thinking, this is a tragic story here about, I mean, about what horrible thing happened to Pluto that he couldn't evolve to be like Goofy, right?
Gotcha.
And so I thought and there's metaphors start pouring out of your head at that
Yeah,
point.
yeah.
You know, what if you tragically were unable to evolve as far as your heart was meant to go? What if you found out that you were meant to be something amazing and somehow you turned out to be something else? And how do you get that back? And
Right.
and that's where all of that came from. And the metaphor of standing upright and hands and how hands control. If you can have all this brawn, even all this intellect, but if you don't have those things, you can't manipulate your world. You can't, and the loss of that would be tragic. And
Right.
so I took that whole basic thing, which is really kind of hilarious and stupid, about Goofy and Pluto, and I just remember thinking, there's a real actual story in this that is never addressed or anything, that I feel like, what if you had two versions of these creatures, one that had evolved or actually one that had de-evolved.
Right. And the tragedy as a result then.
Yeah, and then it becomes a metaphor for, in New Zealand, a lot of people compared it to the Maori population in New Zealand, to where and oppressed people of any stripe, but also if you didn't want it to be a socially conscious sort of preachy kind of film, it ends up being a personal metaphor for you about maybe you were meant to do something wonderful and somehow you settled, and maybe you shouldn't settle. Maybe you should do that thing.
Yep.
You know?
Yeah. No, very, very cool. Yeah. It was, really appreciated the story for that multifaceted, look upon it. The ability to take it from a sociological aspect as well as a personal.
Yeah. And I think that's what that's what fables do better than anything. Because if you watch like a movie like All the President's Men, then that movie is about what it's about. There's not any hidden meaning to it. It's about Watergate. If you watch Lord of the Rings, you're like, the ring represents this and everybody sort of reads their own life into the story, and the ring becomes, for you, you walk out of a movie like Lord of the Rings or Return of the King particularly, or any fable, and you're going and you feel like, what's the application of this for me? What do I feel like I need to go do something that I wasn't.
There you go. I like that. Yeah.
And fables are just great for that, because the story is not what the story's about. The story's about something else.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's under the surface, and everybody sees something different.
Yeah.
Everybody reads something personal into it that they may not even want to share, but it motivates them in some way. And I love stories like that. I love stories that make you, I love movies that change you and make you go, I'm going to do something else.
Yeah.
I was
Yeah.
going to do this, but now I'm going to do this. And
Yeah.
the reason is that story.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
movie, you know?
Yeah. No, I love that. It makes me feel like I want to go do something. That's a
Yeah,
great way to put it. How did you go about getting it picked up then? You mentioned, like I said, about a decade here. How did that finally now the wheels got going?
Well, again, these things end up being, that part of the story ends up being a lot of waiting and things maybe going to happen and then you're not sure and so on and so forth. I feel like what happened was that I had so much of the movie created already, just personally, that the reasons to make it, or the reasons for somebody to finance it, outweighed the reasons for them not to.
Okay.
And so because we could, in a sense, skip a major bit of pre-production, the movie was ready out of the box.
You already had a lot of stuff worked out. Yeah.
And so even the character design, which is not as good as it could have been, it was just completely based on my drawing and my work. And I feel like if I gotten a few more heads in there, it could have been a lot better.
Gotcha.
And yet it also, being willing to let that stand as it was one of the reasons why we were able to really just start animating and start working. The first thing we did was like I said before, was we built and rigged Mosley and Warfield, and then we just started. And I don't know, I have to be honest, I don't know any other movie that's had that journey. I don't know many directors, so I was always ravenous to hear other points of view about, is this normal? Is this how this usually happens? And I didn't have anybody that I could talk to in that regard, so it was kind of a lonely experience. So I wasn't really sure if what I was experiencing was
normal.
Always are. I didn't know. I had no idea. I still don't.
Now that was made at what's the name of the studio there in New Zealand?
It was called Hoo Hoo Studios. It's gone now. So that's
Okay.
another bit of the drama, was that the studio was managed poorly and that it was already starting to go out of business before I was done. And so I felt like I was getting a baby out of a burning building.
Oh my goodness.
This is why I think we met at Real Effects, through Real Effects anyway.
Gotcha.
And I actually, because the money was running out and I wanted to make sure the money was going to our compositors and the people who were actually doing the work, I felt like, all right, I'm going to go work on these films with Real Effects.
Right.
I went to Montreal, worked on Scoob during the day, and then had dailies at night in New Zealand.
Oh my goodness.
To finish the film. So I finished the film in Montreal remotely because the money is running out.
Yeah. That's actually kind of funny. Our studio had done a lot of the commercial work for Scoob, and then my brother had got on there, and he mentioned he was talking with you, and we'd seen some of the is it Chris? No, what's his name? Hayes.
Randy Hayes,
yes, had posted, I think, some stuff. And so I was familiar with it. And then my brother had mentioned he was working with you on Scoob. And I said, hey, let me get a hold of him. Let me know if he'd be interested in a podcast. I'm just always curious. That's what I love about these podcasts. So you're working on Scoob, animating on that while you're trying to get this finished here. It was able to be completed at Hoo Hoo Studios then before it finished up.
It was, and the weirdest part of it was the fact that I was doing post and colorizing the film and everything online.
Gotcha.
So that I got these Bose headphones and I'm listening to the final mix and I'm going, I think this is good. And I don't know how I'm going to find out. And the studio disappeared. And so we had our premiere in Auckland, and I couldn't go. The studio was in taking paying debts mode, and they weren't going to do any more. And so I missed that. But I did get to go. It was nominated for Best Animated Feature at the Asia Pacific Screen Awards.
Okay.
In Brisbane, in Australia.
Very nice.
And so Australia, that awards, the Asia Pacific Screen Awards flew me out to Brisbane, and I saw it in the cinema at Brisbane with a cinema full of folks. And
gotcha.
That was the only time I've ever seen it in the cinema. But it was, all I wanted to do was I just wanted to play it again, you know.
Yeah.
And it sounded like I wanted it to. I really had some folks at DigiPost in New Zealand that did a great job, and they were like going, "Trust me, it sounds great in the cinema," and it did. It sounded I got to say, my composer Elaine Mayrand, who did my music score. You know, usually you get to go and sit there with the orchestra, and we were doing this in Budapest. The orchestra was in Budapest.
Wow.
And I was listening to the sessions on Skype. and messaging via Facebook to the composer. So he would finish a take with a 100-piece orchestra, and then he would text me, "How did that sound?" And then I would text back, "I thought it was fantastic." And then we're watching and then they get the message. We see it on Skype, and he says to all the orchestra, he loved it. And
oh my gosh.
And so there was a lot of things that I think the experience of being a director that I missed just because there was no money. And I wanted to make sure the money went in the music and not the experience of not flying my ass down.
Right.
Because my ass was not necessary. What was necessary is my composer was there. And
that's right.
It's just all these things that I have to be honest, because when we were at Real Effects with Scoob and all that, and we're in Rumble, I'm looking at these directors and I'm going, God, I wish I could have had that experience.
And that's the part where you just make sure you surround yourself by people you trust and that are talented, and you go, hey, look, I'm trusting you on this. That sounds good, but you're there, and I'm trusting your judgment on that, you know?
That's why I had a small crew. I had Manuel and I had Randy. I had Kathy Graves Toon, who was my editor. She came out of Blue Sky and Pixar. I had Morgan Loomis from Weta. I had some great people. I had a great Elaine Mayrand, my composer. I had this very tight group of people, very small group of people, and we all wanted to do the same thing, so that I felt like it was safe for me to be off site and trust them, because we were all wanted this, and nobody was getting paid like they should have been paid. But that's not why any of us were doing it. And so we really, you know, limitation makes art, they say.
Yeah.
I do feel like there is something to be said for the fact that if you have all the resources in the world, you become weird. You just get weird.
Yeah.
And you start expecting things that you shouldn't expect. If you have limitations, then suddenly
you get a little more creative, a little more crafty, huh?
And it makes people work well together. I feel so.
Gotcha. No, that's great. I know we've talked about Mosley here. But you also animate, you know, any particular projects that in your career that you've just really were kind of those same kind of things, those highlight ones here, that you've really enjoyed?
I did very much enjoy working at Weta when I did. There's the traditional animation, and then there's what Weta does, which is you know, more mocap-y kind of stuff. I got to work on BFG, but I did work Alvin and the Chipmunks film at Weta. I did enjoy working with Real Effects and Scoob. It was nice after being in charge of everything.
Okay.
To just have a shot.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, just be in charge of a shot. My existence is these 200 frames, and I just need to make everybody happy with those 200 frames. But I do feel like the things that I've enjoyed the most are when, and I always got cast, you know, everybody gets typecast in their shots. they do body mechanics, or they do whatever. The thing I noticed at Weta that they would always give me was when the character starts crying shots. So those are the ones that they always give me. And I have to shamelessly admit, I love working with the face, and
Nice.
I love getting the face to. I love it when you create the illusion that the character's thinking, and that it's not just movement, but there's thought and then movement. I love feeling. I love eye darts. I love things that make you feel like, holy mackerel,
It's a believable character. Yeah.
That character's thinking about things.
Yeah.
And is having a whole process going on inside of them before they do what they're going to do next.
Yeah.
So.
Very cool. Any parallels in your directing and writing side that parallels how you approach animation in regards to maybe blocking or final polish, things like that might be great tips for our listeners?
I feel like whenever you get, and the best leads that you have, if they can give you a sequence of shots.
Okay.
Right. And I do, but whether you get that or whether you don't get that, I feel like you ought to see every shot you're given as a short film. It has a beginning, a middle, and an end. It has a setup and a payoff. You sort of need to get this beautiful tunnel vision to where you see that this shot is your baby, and think about, particularly if you get a shot that has no dialogue to it. I always felt like those are the best shots, because I felt like you can make something happen that's not scripted. You can create a moment that, even if it's just that there's this character listening to another character, and you see him listening and processing what he's hearing, and it's believable. That's astounding. And that wasn't in the script, and that wasn't in the animatic either, because that's just that small stuff, right? But it makes the shot believable. It makes you feel like characters are interacting, and so I think I've always felt like whenever I got a shot, I got an opportunity to do something that hasn't been handed to me, or that wasn't in the script. That is it's a short film. It's like your own short film. So
Gotcha.
If you treat it that way, I think you get less picky about, well, I didn't get this shot, and I want the big money shots and all these sorts of things. Those things are so meticulously planned out and gone over that you can't really surprise anybody.
You're just executing it now.
You're just executing what ends up being sometimes endless notes. But if you're given a shot and nobody's really considering much to happen in that shot, I love that moment in the first Rocky film. You remember the first Rocky film?
It's been a long time, yeah.
Before there were all the other Rocky films.
Yeah.
Because he doesn't win that fight, and there's a moment when Apollo Creed and his people say they're just shocked that this guy's still going, and they say he doesn't think it's a damn show, he thinks it's a damn fight. Because they're like, they thought this was just going to be a show, but no, guy's going to fight.
He really means it. Yeah.
He doesn't have any illusions that he's going to win, but he's going to be there, and he's going to be there. He's going to do something. He's going to make a mark. And I feel like when you get a shot, you like, maybe nobody else in the process thinks that this is a good shot, but they give it to you and you do something that's unexpected. I always loved it when I would put a shot in and you're in the room in dailies and everybody has this first reaction to what you just did. They didn't expect that. They didn't talk about it, but you did something with it that nobody expected. It didn't wreck anybody else's work or wreck continuity, but it just created a moment that somehow made this whole sequence
spark a little more. Yeah.
If you think about it, in a live action film, you got a lens on an actor, and he can make spontaneous decisions of things to do with his face that change the whole tenor of the scene, and it's spontaneous. And in animation, you have to reverse engineer all that.
Yeah.
but at the same time, with an animator getting a shot like that, it's an opportunity to where people can not only just laugh, but go, wow, I love how so-and-so is reacting to what he's hearing right now. And I love the way you have this character, even just shifting weight nervously, you feel like they're processing what's happening in the scene.
Yeah.
So it's those intangibles, I think, that a lot of people miss.
Gotcha.
And that's where all the good stuff is, I've always felt. So.
All right. Enjoy the process, right?
Yeah.
Now, kind of in closing, I don't know, maybe you can't talk too much about it. As I mentioned to you earlier, we've had Brian Ingram, who's headed up the Brazen animation there. And you mentioned you're doing some work with them. How did you get hooked up with them? We've had him in on a podcast before. Sorry if I didn't mention that.
Yeah,
so,
great
guy.
The Brazen's a fan. I got to say, as somebody who's helping to create some IP for them, this has been probably the most rewarding studio experience I've ever had. Just because I'm writing their next 2 films, and it's been such a wonderful collaborative and a small group of people collaborating, trying to do something. Again, I always think this is the best motivation, is to make the movie you would love to see. Don't make the movie that you think the market is anticipating. Don't follow up. What would you like to see? What would you go see whether you made it or not? And I think that's the mentality that we have at Brazen right now, is what would we like to see? And let's make that movie. And so it's been fantastic. And the talent level, as far as a smaller studio is concerned, is fantastic. And they're really wanting to build, I think, from the ground up. I know these studios, the bigger they get, I saw it at DNA and other places, the bigger they get, the more you really have to guard that sense of community and collaboration,
right?
And watch out for the corporate thing that sort of steals your soul. And we're trying to make good stuff and write good stories that are going to be wonderful for the medium. And so I've had a blast with them so far. I've been with them just about 6 months now, and it's
awesome,
amazing.
Very cool. Well, I'd love to give a shout out to them. I've, like I said, Brian's a great guy. Love what I see coming out of there. So it's just neat to see that you were hooked up with them. So very, very cool.
We're having a great time, and I hope to show the whole world a whole lot of good stuff very soon.
All right. So in closing, you mentioned Mosley's been kind of making its way around a little bit here, and you think that maybe in the U.S. we'll see it.
I think this year for sure.
Year, okay.
Well, when this year, I'm not certain.
Gotcha.
A lot of these, and COVID has obviously changed.
Yeah.
Everything, and
how things are handled.
Yeah. And so now it's all about how do you release, and whether it's theatrical and streaming. We're more recently, the film this month is going to be at the Kaboom Festival in Amsterdam.
Okay.
And again, all these things like Annecy or Ottawa, where Mosley have been online.
Yeah.
And so it is an opportunity where you normally wouldn't go to these festivals, and that'd be the only way you could see them.
Right.
If you think about it, COVID's opened it up so that anybody can go to Annecy.
Yeah, gotcha.
And
so actually a silver lining on that, huh?
It's odd because in so many ways, I feel like Mosley has actually been in front of more eyes than it would have otherwise.
Gotcha.
But,
very nice.
And we've had a great run in the festivals. We got a few more to do, and after that, I would expect to see us streaming probably in the fall, September, October.
Okay. Awesome. I only mention that because I'd love for our audience to be able to kind of keep that on their radar. It's something very, very worth watching. Like I said, it was surprising how well it was done, and because I know it was obviously on a smaller budget compared to the bigger studios, and it just looked great both in animation and visuals, and just a really fun and cute story. So I really appreciate your time on this podcast and just being able to talk with you on this. So.
Absolutely. Well, thanks. And Keith, if I can give you links if you want to share those to people who want to see trailers or clips or things like that.
That sounds fantastic.
And that all that is out there. So if anybody wants to find it. So.
All right. Well, Kirby, best of luck to you. I'm sure we'll get you in another podcast or in maybe your next movie with Brazen or something like that.
All right. Fantastic.
All right. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you.
And with that, we're out.